Hi again and welcome to the TalkingBass podcast. This week Ellen is sitting down to talk bass with another Irish lady of bass, the very cool and super talented Tanya O Callaghan. Since relocating to LA from her home in Ireland, Tanya has established herself as a first call session bassist, playing with many legends of rock such as Maynard James Keenan, Nuno Bettencourt and Snider, as well as performing on shows such as Riverdance and The Voice. In this interview, Tanya provides a wealth of tips on making it as a professional musician in LA, staying healthy on the road, and much, much more. So let's join Ellen as she sits down to talk bass with the wonderful Tanya O Callaghan.
Hello and welcome to the TalkingBass podcast with me, your host Ellen O'Reilly, and a very giddy Tanya O Callaghan.
Drogheda Mullingar, woo!
Oh yeah, it's the Irish bass lasses corner here today.
That's it.
Yeah, Tanya, how are you doing over there in LA?
Good, I'm actually out in Joshua Tree. I moved out to the desert just to get away from all the madness. But very well. I mean, we're lucky to have the sunshine and all that helps with the sanity of, the impending doom feeling every day. But no,
Exactly.
pretty good. All things considered, I'm one of the lucky ones at the moment.
Cool, all right, cool. Well, that's great that you're out there. I mean, I'm back in Ireland and it's all grey skies, and are you still playing the bass guitar? I'm like, yeah. You know what
Don't you love when people from your hometown say, "Are you still in that band?" and they mention your very first band ever, and you're like, "I was 17 in that band."
I'm just like, yeah.
Yeah, I still am.
I know. I know. It's nice to pop back every now and again. I'm proper back at the minute, but like, tell us about going right to the beginning. Like, how did you get into playing bass in the first place?
It was an accident. I just tripped over one. I was like, oh shit. No, it was a bit mad. I actually, I said I was going to be a musician before I picked up a bass. It was a very bizarre sequence of events. I was around music a lot. As you'll know, Mullingar is a fairly musical town, and we have a good few venues that all the bands would always come through. So I was around that a lot. My dad used to work in this venue, the Stables, the Yukon, as people would know, the front bar, and the Stables was the venue that all the Irish bands and international would play in often. So I kind of grew up around bands, and Mullingar is full of musicians, and I was always interested in it but never played because I just worked in rescue centres. Animal welfare has been my jam since I was a little girl. So anyway, I was around all these musicians, and then I decided I liked drums, and I took a couple lessons in drums, and I was like, I couldn't afford a drum kit, and I was kind of enjoying that. And then my very first band I was singing background vocals in, and I did my first gig in the Stables, and I remember coming off stage and being like, that's it, I want to be a performer. So I immediately dropped out of school. My parents were like, wait, what? You're like almost finished and you're doing really well. I was like, there's just something about stage. So whatever that was that took over, I decided to go and do a music course in FOSS. As Irish people know, it's not really a thing over here, but the further education, further training. And I signed up for the music course as a drummer because I had taken a couple of lessons. And then I was like, they have an electronic drum kit, and I didn't like it. So I saw a local guy, Niall Masterson, who's an awesome bass player, play, and I was like, oh, I really like bass. He was playing all this cool, I'd never heard bass outside of the context, or never thought about bass outside of the context of just straightforward rock, whatever, non-complicated. And I heard Niall play Jacko and Primus, and I was like, oh wow, and he's playing all this melodic stuff. So I was just mesmerized by bass, and that was it. I picked up a bass. I was 17 though. I started late, and then I was just obsessed. And then it was like, okay, I'll join every band, and that's what I did.
I was 17
and I met
as well.
I met you along the gigging ways. I'm sure many times we were on the same, our covers bands. But that's the thing, in Ireland, a big thing is doing wedding bands, doing the corporate gigs, and that was where I cut my teeth because I'm completely self-taught. So it was just playing in bands.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much like that in Ireland. It's a big scene of that kind of stuff. But yeah, we would have crossed paths loads of times, and it was kind of just before we both left the country. I moved to London, you moved to Los Angeles. So what was it that brought you? What was it about Los Angeles that attracted you then?
Well, LA was an afterthought of. I had been over when I was 20. I was 19 or 20 when I met Maynard Keenan in Glasgow at a gig, and I was a huge prog fan, as I still am, and a huge Tool fan. And very long story short, through mutual crew that we worked with, I met Maynard and we got talking about this project that he has that was like a side project per se called Pussifer. And he invited me to play on it because it was a revolving door of guest musicians. So obviously I jumped at the opportunity. It didn't actually happen for a good year or so after that. So I was around 21 and I went to Arizona. And, it's like a deer in headlights going over to record with one of my favorite artists in the world. So I went over to write and record with him and a couple of other musicians. And after I did that session, I was just like, hold on a minute. If I can get gigs and play with that level of artists, maybe there's something to be said about moving across the pond, because I had already, like, you cut your teeth in Ireland, you do all these gigs and it's wonderful. And we have a good, in better days, a thriving music scene, but it's a small scene and you can do all the gigs and then you'll go around the same circle. So, and not that that's a bad thing if you want to stay in that scene, but I just had this like, oh, let's go. So a couple of years passed and I would like go back and forth with this idea of maybe I should move to New York, London, LA. And then I started researching and came across like the ASCAP convention, NAM, like just doing a bunch of research to see if I knew anyone that had been out there. And, you're like LA, they say you should, it's got this scene. So I just decided to, fuck it, let's just go give it a go. So I went over the first time when I was about, I think I was 24, 25, and I went to NAM and I went to ASCAP. And I didn't know anyone, but it was like, okay, there's something happening here. So you just go around and you're not giving out the business cards, the old obligatory business card at NAM. And then I did that a couple of times. I couldn't get a visa at the time because I obviously wasn't established. So I went back and forth to LA about 6 times as a visitor. And each time I kept meeting more and more people, getting invited to jam nights, doing gigs. And then I was like, okay, there's really something to this. So it's time to get a visa. So I moved here 5-6 years ago, like permanently. Well, not permanently, but I'm still an alien resident, but
Yeah. But working on that.
Yeah. That's a whole other headache people have no idea about.
Oh God, yeah, I know. I remember you're telling me before, like, pretty difficult, but hopefully a bit easier under Biden.
He does have a bit of paddy in him. I don't think that I don't sway either way. I just like sway as an independent, and I think that you fight your own battles, and there's no panacea to all of this. There's no magic pill. So, but it's just establishment. So if visas, and it's the more your career is established, it's a money racket. So there's no person that's going to come in and wave a magic wand and make your life easier.
Exactly. Gotta do it yourself. So. Tell me about like your first basses then. What were your first instruments?
Music Man sub. Do you remember those?
I remember that. I do remember that. I remember yours.
You remember my red Music Man sub? I wore that thing to death. That was my first bass. I absolutely loved it. I believe they discontinued them. I still have it. It's back in Mullingar. I love that thing. I actually, would you believe it? That was I got that and an Ibanez, an old broken up Ibanez, in exchange for like 6 cans of beer and like a fiver. And like it was like this exchange, and a pedal I had. But I love that bass, and I actually used the Music Man sub on the recordings with Maynard, which when I think back now as like someone who has the best gear with Sadowskys and that, I can't believe I used my old buckety bass that wasn't even set up, but it just goes to show it doesn't matter. It's really in the player, and it doesn't. I've never been a big like gearhead. I'm not that obsessed. I'm a plug and play. Because you have to be when you're on the road. You don't know what amp you're gonna get when you arrive at a festival and you've 5 minutes to sound check. So, but yeah, my sub was my first bass, and I still have it.
And what is your kind of go-to configuration on your Sadowsky now, like?
Sadowsky, I have a 5 and a 4 MYC. Mm-hmm. And everything they're very much an awesome plug and play. The EQ bands on these are awesome. I tend to play with very little top end, just a little for the lively twang, but I'm more mids and subs for sure. I like the more warm. So I tend to have my mids rolled almost fully and my bass full way up, and just a tiny bit of top end. Because they're a very lively bass, and they're very powerful. So I've blown many amps up, hence why I got the nickname TKO, because I just plug in and plug everything up in a rock gig, and it's like poof. So
so what is it about Sadowsky then that you attracted you to that brand of bass?
I mean, I've known of Roger's work as a master builder for many years, and honestly, like in the beginning of my career, I used to always think like, wow, I'd love to have one of those someday, but it always seemed like so far out of reach because they really are. Like he's a master builder, and it's so like up there, and you're going around with your trying to keep your old gear together. And I met Roger at Bass Player Live, I think it was, when that was still a thing. That was awesome. It's not on anymore. And I just sat down at his booth and I was kind of noodling away playing some more melodic stuff. And I remember we started chatting because he was like, "Oh, thanks," because he didn't come over and start like slapping the bass aggressively and like annoying everyone or turning on. I was just playing some little noodle with harmonics or whatever. And we just started a conversation, and then I'd mutual bass friends that already played his gear, and I probably said that day, "Oh my God, someday I hope to have your instruments." And that was the beginning of a family friendship. Roger is now like literally my bass dad. They call me Tanya O Sadowsky because I became part of that family. And at the time I was playing with an artist that I was doing a lot of East Coast shows, and we were doing a lot of TV stuff. So when I was in New York, Roger would give me his basses for the save me bringing all my gear from wherever I had come from, Europe or the West. And I just started using them kind of temporarily, and then it was like a transition into I have never put them down since. But they're just so beautifully built. Like you can tell, I mean, look, you can pick up a $50 bass and it can feel amazing. It's not really about the cost of the bass. It's the love that went into making it. And knowing Roger so well and seeing his work and seeing the craftsmanship, also how light they are when you're on the road all the time is a huge thing. Like huge thing. We used to haul our big ass amps around and everything, and the bigger the better. And now it's like, what's the lightest thing I can have? So I think definitely that the lightweightness and just the tone of the wood and the craftsmanship that went into it, they're just incredible.
Great. And tell me about like your affiliation with Gallion Kruger amps.
Yeah, I've been using GK for a couple of years now. Actually, my first amp was GK, like long, back in the day before I was even doing this professionally. I bought a secondhand GK, and then through the years, I was with a couple of different companies. I don't do a lot of the heavy, like I'm not technically endorsed by anyone because it's either a natural friendship. I don't believe in just doing like taking gear for the sake of gear for a post. I really don't. I want to have a true connection to the instrument or the gear myself that I like. So GK was one of those things where I always used them. I did work for a little while with Warwick and they were wonderful, but they just discontinued because they're doing the guitars and basses more now, and that was awesome. But when I worked with them, they were great. But then GK just naturally came about because I was requesting them on my rider for shows. And they're great, and they're a family-run business as well. And I've just always loved the combination of my Sadowsky and GK. I like how it sounds, so that's what I use.
Yeah, cool. Good answer.
That's the basics of it. Straightforward.
Exactly. I'm the same, to be honest with you. I'm like, yeah, Sandberg, they're so light. There they are, lovely and light.
Yeah.
And Mark Bass, nice and light. That's nice. Sounds good. Plug it in. Happy days. I'm the same.
Absolutely.
I can't deal with the faff.
We did the faff early on. Now we're like simplified faff.
Yeah, 17-year-old was 17 to age of 20. I was nothing but faff. Since then, I'm like, God, can't be arsed. Plug it in.
Remember, I know Ireland. We used to drag her. I remember I had this giant, and I loved it. This giant Warwick stack. Like it was huge, and it weighed a ton. And of course, you'd have a load into a bar that had like the stairway to heaven before you get to the gig, and the head is heavier than you, and you do all that, and then you're like, hold on a minute. Now I have something that I can literally put in my handbag and throw it onto a gig. Exactly. Modern technology. It's great.
It's brilliant. So what about IEMs? Have you ever had to use them on shows?
No. Well, not had to, as in like you have an option usually, but actually that's a lie because I did have to with the Riverdance with Heartbeat of Home. That was like non-negotiable because it was too big of a band. But for like the option, because of the realm I ended up in, the more heavier rock and like hip hop and R&B, it's usually live monitors. And it's not that it's the right thing because you've 4 ears, but I do still prefer the live vibe. But generally, like with shows with theaters, it's more mandatory, but I'll still do one in, one out.
Yeah, I'm totally the same. I just,
because if you can't get the ambience.
Yeah. Well, on a show I was playing in, we could dial in the ambience, but I was just like, oh, half the time I was
Yeah.
like, I want to pop them out, you know. And there's a man, and
There,
the lad behind me is slapping around an electric kit, and I'm like, oh, give me a live band,
I
man.
know, I know, I know. And look, it depends. Obviously, I don't diss on them. I think they're an amazing piece of technology, but it is weird. Like with when I did the Heartbeat at Home Riverdance tours, there was too many of us. There was like 13 dancers on stage and 10 in the band, so you had to do it. But we could still use a live monitor as well because the same thing. We had ambient mics, but it's not the same. It's not like ambience in a box. And yeah.
Exactly. And what about effects? Do you ever muck about with effects pedals?
Yeah, for studio, yes. Live, for my last couple of gigs, because I did obviously D Snider for like 2 years, and then Stephen Adler touched some more rock and that realm. I do always have like I have my MXR fuzz. I love that. And I'll sometimes bring chorus and that, but I don't tend to need it because I usually have two guitarists in each band, and the lads are just blasting. And I would bring these elaborate pedal boards, and then be like, okay, I'm just gonna go straight in because the band needs bass. It needs like a solid warm cut through of bass, not like more distortion. And I'll just kick it on for choruses and that. But I have a full pedal board set up for when I'm doing my own stuff and when I'm doing studio stuff, because obviously some sessions the higher you require something very specific. So but I'm not into elaborate setups. I just go through phases depending on the project, because I do a lot of random studio just for someone's album, and they'll request it. So per gig, as you know, as a session player, as a hired gun, you do what the music needs, you do what the song requires. So
What about like how did you establish yourself in LA? Like, how did all these great gigs come about? Like, Stephen Adler, Maynard James Keenan, Nuno, we already spoke about Maynard and Dee, and all those other great gigs that happened. Like, how did it go from being 17, picking up bass in Mullingar, right, in the Midlands of Ireland, to making a name for yourself in Ireland and then crossing the pond? Like, how did that progress, that career?
It's a hustle. Like the thing is, you have to get into the scene wherever you are, as you know well from London. And it really was a case of playing out, which is something that makes me really sad for younger musicians coming out to LA in a time like now, and all that just got pulled from under. Because when I look back, that's exactly what it was. It was like playing jam nights, saying yes to everything. I remember the first like gig I did over here was with Michelangelo Battio, the guitar player that plays the four necks. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, whatever, I'll do it. Just playing jam nights. Because the thing is, even though it's a huge city and it's so overwhelming when you first come out here and you're like, I don't know anybody. How am I ever going to know anybody? The musicians are at the jam nights and they're doing it when they're off the road. So I would end up playing with members of X, Y, and Z, and then they'd be like, oh, yeah, she knows her shit and she's reliable or whatever. And then it's just a slow burn of that for a while. Like the first year was like crickets, but I was always out playing. You just gotta, and then someone told me along the way, you gotta get on social media, you're like, oh, all these things. But you're like, you just have to show up consistently all the time in the scene, and that applies to whatever your business is. And then also surround yourself with people who are already doing what you're trying to do. So that's really diving in, going to all the different jam nights, going to the rock ones, going to the jazz ones, going to the R&B nights, going to the whatever it was, singer-songwriter nights, just to be around musicians who are already doing what it is you came here to achieve. And then over time you get invited to do stuff, and then jam nights, and then people see you play. And then like the first gig I got was off the back of a jam night with a Disney pop artist, and then I did that, and then the drummer from like Pink and Foreigner saw me and he was playing with Dee, and then that came about from that. And then I had done another charity night and met Stephen, and it was all just being out there. Like you can't sit in your room and expect gigs to show up. Now it's a little different because obviously we have the internet and you can literally sit in your room and play and people will see you, but it's not the same. Like the old fashioned way is how you're going to, because you're playing with live musicians, people are understanding how you lock together. And it was just a case of that. It was being out and playing and showing up at other people's gigs, because people don't show up. Like people are always like, yeah, I'll go to that gig. And no, I would go to everyone's gig. If someone asked me to come to their gig, I was at their gig. Like, yeah I'm here. So yeah, and making friendships, as you know yourself, it's so essential.
Well, actually, when you were talking about getting out there and going to all the gigs, I remember one particular night going out for a few drinks with you in Dublin, and I think we went to about 5 gigs that night. I was like, I would
Probably.
just, yeah, you dragged me to all these gigs. Normally, I would just sit in the corner with me pints and talk shite all night, but you're like, no, we're going to this gig. I'm like, all right,
Oh, we just went 5 gigs. Yeah.
yeah,
Because that's like it is. It's a community, it's a community, and A, I wanted to, and B, it was just like that's how you meet the people that are doing what you want to do, and it's the same in business or whatever it is you want to do. You have to. That's like a key thing I'm always talking about. You have to surround yourself with people who are doing what you already doing what you want to do, and then you learn from them.
exactly. And then one thing leads to another, which is something I've said
Literally.
often on a night out. Well, I am a comedian. What do you expect? Like,
That's true. I love that. I love that.
here's a good one for all the crew at Bassist Ireland. There's something in the water. I've been talking about it to Paul Moore, Keith Duffy, Paul Bushnell, yourself. Like, what's going on in Ireland? Ireland does produce some absolutely banging bass players. What's going on with that?
It does. I don't know. Do we have like some like ancestral like undertone going in our frequency? I don't know what it is. But you're right, and it's because people say that, and then we always claim it for our own towns as well. Like, there's
Oh,
something
yeah.
in the water in Mullingar. There's something in the water in Drogheda.
Yeah. In my case,
I don't
there
know. I think
literally is something in the water in Drogheda. You know what I mean? Just don't drink the tap water. That's
just maybe that's why we didn't drink the tap water or something. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. And then we have. You notice this from traveling as well as Irish people. We have this like global access of banter or something. I don't even know how to describe it. It's so strange. Everyone's like, "Oh my God, you're from Ireland. Come on in."
yeah.
Maybe our staying neutral in the wars helped in the end. But I don't know. We do have a lot of amazing bass players.
You've got a great online presence. People check out our website. It's absolutely fantastic. TanyaOCallaghan.com, and follow on Instagram, Twitter, FB, the whole lot. And you've always been very good with the social media. So what would be like your advice for people who want to get their name out there with that?
It's funny that you say that because I think I'm terrible at it, and I'm like trying all the time because for me, I've always been like, okay, I want to keep it organic, and I have this frustration in a way that, as you know, and anyone, I was just posting about this morning actually, because I don't just play bass. I do all these other things, and I'm active in different scenes. I'm always trying to find this balance because often you're like pissing off your bass audience if you're posting about health and activism. But finding that balance is something I'm constantly playing with. And I think just the key is to post regularly. And this is only something that I literally have been like trying to be diligent with myself in the last few months, because the pandemic, it was easier when you're off the road. When you're on the road, you can do all the live stuff, but just showing up. And it sounds corny to a lot of people, but literally being yourself and not trying to create like some perfect avatar of, whatever it is, I'm going to do 400 takes of this song. And like, that's, I don't need to put up perfect bass videos. I'll put them up when it feels right. And, using your platform for other causes as well, and interacting and supporting other musicians. But I think there is no magic pill per se, but just consistency and interesting content, not just like for the sake of it, just like something interesting. And I know people have an attention span of like a second these days and may not read, but the ones that want to read it and engage will. And that's what matters, because it's kind of, I think with social media, looking at, you might be frustrated that it's harder to build your numbers and people are obsessed with numbers. But if you get a slow, steady audience growth that are going to stay with you for a long time versus like doing something that's really not you and outside yourself just to get numbers, then they'll just fall away. So I think just accepting that like slow and steady growth is quite often the case, and not because these days you get bombarded with like, do you want 5,000 followers? Do this. That I like, no, I want real followers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's kind of just being like authenticity. People are starved for authenticity these days. So just showing up and being yourself, and making it fun. Don't be so serious.
Absolutely. But I like the fact that as well, in recent years you've divulged from obviously well-known established session bassist into other avenues. So tell me about that. Like, what? Because now you're an activist, you're a public speaker, you've got your own TV show. I mean, there's all this other aspects to you. So when did that happen?
Well, the truth is that was always my foundation. And I got distracted by my very busy touring life, which isn't a complaint, but I've been an activist my whole life. Like animal rights, animal welfare, and everything environmental is something that I've been doing since I was 5. Like literally writing letters to the government since 5. So I always had this vision that the two would eventually come together, because having a platform to me is no use unless I'm using it for something. Like I don't want to be famous, but being known helps on whatever level that is, big or small, because then you can use your platform, right? So it naturally started to happen over the past few years. The more established I got in the music industry, the more I was able to engage with my real passion, what drives me, which is, for the planet, for the animals. Like, speaking as well came about just because I never shut up about it. And then I kept getting asked to talk about it at forums, and I was doing gigs in the corporate world. And then it's just all these doors started to open. You see all these opportunities. So then I was like, you know what, instead of starting 2 different platforms, I'm just going to be true to myself and have them both together. And the show came up, that naturally came about with Derek Green from Sepultura, because we were talking about this idea we both had, because he's also like a long time vegan, and how we could use our platforms, and maybe what we could do and use all our celebrity friends or whatever, the shiny parts to push this movement forward. So we started creating the show Highway to Health, and it just snowballed in the year or two. We went out, did all the fundraising, got all the guests, went all over the world, shot season 1. And then the pandemic happened, which was awful. But what we did was we switched into edit mode. So now we have season 1 done. And instead of me trying to, I was initially going to separate it all and have all these different pages, like the speaker, the activist. I'm like, you know what? No, it's all just actually me. And this was my core foundation. I ended up being a musician as one of my professions. So now I'll just put them all together. And, people who follow me know that, and it's not, I don't try and separate it or hide it. So that's who I am. And bass playing, as I always say, and it's not to downplay, but bass playing is one thing that I do, and I love it, and I love performing, but I'm not like some prolific, studious bassist is going to sit all day and teach people. That's not me. Some of my friends are the best in the world at that, and I love it. But I am all these multitude of things rolled into one. So I just try and keep that all together on social media, basically.
Yeah.
And then have the crack playing bass.
Absolutely. No, it's great to see all that. I'm actually very much the same, because I started doing comedy, and then I was like, oh, maybe I should have a set. So right now it's all separate, Ellen O'Reilly comedy and then Ellen O'Reilly. So when the world opens up and I can get new photos done and all that crack, I'm just gonna put it all on the one website, because it's just all aspects of whoever you are.
You. It's you, exactly. And you're a scientist.
I used to be, yeah. There you go. That's a fun
pretty
fact.
Awesome thing. Scientist, bassist, and comedian. I love it. I follow all of that.
Every now and again, some people would every now and again, they're like, what? And then they ask me something sciencey, and I'm like, I forget, I don't know. I haven't been in a lab in 12 years. I don't know, man. Don't ask me that. I barely knew when I was there. I was just like, I just want to test this and go home.
Oh no, you'll get to the end of this zoonotic disease for us. Get back in the lab, O'Reilly.
Zoonotic is right. I know, yeah. I actually was thinking of when all the, jobs started popping up and, the plague happened. I was just sitting there going, God, will I just go... I could easily go and do testing in these labs, but I just couldn't. The thought of putting on that coat again and doing the 9 to 5, I just couldn't deal with it. So I'm like,
well,
no,
there your reaction is telling you, whereas if you got excited about it, you'd know. You're like, no, I'm done. That's cool. It's cool to have many strings to your bow, but do the ones that make you most excited.
Exactly, yeah. So actually, that's a good point. Going from being a prolific bass player and all that. The skills that you learned as a professional musician, how did that cross over into all these other avenues you're involved in?
I think, as you know, just being a professional touring musician is no easy feat. And if you can do that and just being on the road, one tour I did, with the Riverdance show that I did, Harpy to Home, for instance, as just tedious level goes, that was 18 months solid. 9 shows a week, 70 something people on the road together. That's a lot of personality. So you don't know it at the time, but you're learning so much just about human behavior, human interaction, dealing with all these different types of personalities, blending in, just it's things you couldn't learn unless you went out on the road and did this level of madness is our life of touring. Being on the road for months at a time with a bunch of dudes, like it's not for the faint-hearted. And just dealing with like insane travel, insane, like people, people look at Instagram and that and they're like, oh, it's great, you played with X, Y, and Z, it looks so glamorous. You're like, yeah, but it took, we did 6 flights back to back, and then we had a 4-hour drive, and then we went from Germany to LA, back to Sweden, back to New York. Yeah, it was great, yeah. But I don't regret any of it. I love but it is kind of that, to your question, that teaches you all these little life skills that you can't quite put a label on, but it's just like the hard knocks of life school per se. And then everything after that is easy, and you learn, like I tour managed a lot of my original bands, so I'm naturally like very into organizing. So when it came to Highway to Health, I was like, I'm just going to manage the project. So as far as like booking talent and booking flights and fundraising and cutting budgets or whatever, because you've learned it somewhere along the way from touring and working with bands and working with different tour managers. And, it's just all these little skills you pick up along the way that you can then apply to different aspects of your life, I think.
Absolutely. Just getting by with getting on with everyone is
I know.
one of the biggest skills.
It is for sure.
Not to mention the smell of a load of lads on a bus.
Dude. Tour buses. I used to go around putting like lavender pillows on everyone's bunk. I'm like, anybody know? Because I'm also very much into Zen and things smelling nice and cleaning up. I'm like, band mom. Let's all go to the gym and do yoga instead of partying. I'm so boring. I'm not a rock star at all.
So I see behind you, I see a little, you have a little synth-based situation going on there.
Little moogage, yeah.
Tell us about
little sub fatty. Well, this is all. So myself and my friend, I decided for the show that for Highway to Health, I mean, other than recording with my friends all the time, that I would do as much of the music as possible for the TV show. So this is the studio setup for that, because we're trying to do all of the little like 15-20 second turnarounds there. I'm like, well, I might as well put my own music in the show. So, and the music industry's so hard on artists these days that the pro of getting your show on a streamer is like more eyes on the prize and get your project out there, but it means basically no royalties for music because it's a streamer. But if we get on networks, so it's all, and that's another thing about like the entrepreneurship side of music, like other than we can't play live at the moment, so we have to put our thinking caps on. And for me, because I'm doing the show and I'm doing all this like online corporate stuff, I'm like, well, I'll just try and get as much of my own music and my friends' music and hire my friends and try to create a little kind of family pod where when the show gets out there, it will also help everybody. And just getting the music out there, as some of the music in the show will actually be what will be on my album. So then you're familiarizing people who watch the show when it's out on, hopefully very soon. Yeah, and just so that's what this whole setup's about, because we're doing it's quite funny because I don't have a lot of experience in like scene writing. I've done a bit of it, but it's fun because we'll be watching the edits and like, oh, okay, this needs like something that's a little heavier, this needs something that's a little more ambient. So that's what all this is for.
That's cool. So you're using it all in Logic, or what's your setup?
My friend runs Pro Tools from this studio, and we just so I have another friend I would go back and forth to LA, and sometimes Logic on that, and that's
cool.
Yeah, it depends on the producer, but it's a lot of fun because it's nice having a mission like that, because we can't tour live at the moment, so it's like, well, we'll write, and it's funny writing little turnarounds instead of full songs. It's like just like impact moments for 15 seconds.
Yeah, also pretty sweet to get a sync deal. It would be. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's hope. I'm like, do it all. Just keep throwing shit at the wall, and eventually some of it will stick.
Absolutely, yeah. So tell us about, like, you just mentioned it in an album there.
Yeah, and unfortunately, every time I look back over all my bass interviews over the past few years, I'm like, I'm doing an album, as every artist is doing an album. It's really hard though when you are, and this is not an excuse. I do write, and I write quite weird stuff that doesn't necessarily have one genre, but because music became my job full time for the past 5-6 years very heavily, it's very hard to be creative, and that's a frustration I'm sure a lot of musicians that are busy touring and all that would associate with, where music becomes your work. So when you go home, for me it's always been hard to like find the creativity. So over the years, I just started slowly piecing together of all these like ideas, and of course, I've this wonderful circle of incredible musical friends, and I'm like, hey, would you want to play on my record? So the pandemic again being off the road has let me push that forward. So I do have the guts of an album actually written, and my problem at the moment is deciphering who will play on the tracks because I have a very cool list of guests. So it's more like who will I put on what? And also, can I use them for like activism reasons? And I'm writing a song for Sea Shepherd at the moment. We're going to have a bunch of celebrity guests on that, and yeah, and just finish it. There's no, I don't. It's not like I'm trying to get a record deal or a song on the radio. It's just for the love of the art of it. So it is almost there. But I also said that to another bass magazine a long time ago. So. But I've like 40 balls in the air at the moment, so it's happening as it happens.
That's good. All right. So tell us about like, I mean, is it an instrumental album, or is there any what's the vibe?
No, well, I might do one or two instrumental just for laugh because as bassist that's fun to just have. A lot of them are three-piece, but the most of the songs that are written musically I've left space for guests to play a guitar solo or a guest drummer to come on, and then I have a couple of friends that want to put vocals on it. So I'd say there will be vocals for sure, and I might just do one or two indulgent bassy tracks. Why not? There's no rules, especially now.
I want to talk to you about, you've got such a great vibe on stage performing. Like, you're a session player, but you're not like, I'm going to go into the background. You know what I mean? You're a pow. And,
Pow.
You're a pow on the stage. There she is. It's unmistakable. It's a presence, a definite presence, and a definite image as well. Like, so tell me about like how, because that's become your trademark. Like, and how did that develop, and what is the benefit of having a bit of a trademark if you're a session player?
I know it's funny because people say this, and it's when it is just you and how you look or dress or whatever, you don't really think about it. So it's always hard for me to kind of answer it fully because partly it's just like, I don't know, I guess this is just the style that I grew into. Originally, speaking of like being in the background, like a lot of gigs I did back in the day, especially in Ireland, you were expected to be like wallpaper, be beige, So there was a lot of just standing in the background with the drummer and guitarist and then the artist being out front. So I actually got used to that, and I'm fine. I was fine with that. But for me, playing bass is a very physical thing. Like I very much feel when I'm on stage, it's like every hit, every stab, every syncopation. I'm a very physical, visual player, and I think that's just how I play. It's not something like I was like, okay, I need to be more visually present. But it was when I started touring with the likes of like Dee was really one that like let me loose. Before that, I'd been on a lot of gigs that I was doing that, but I was like containing it because their management are like, band has to stay in the background. This is about the artist. And then Dee was very much like, try it out, stage me. And I was like, oh, it's on. So we would just have such a laugh because that was like, really like just be you, go for it. So there was a few artists like that over the past few years that are like, no, we want you to be you. And then as far as like image and that, honestly, that's just how I would dress anyway, regardless of if I was a musician or not. I like more, I don't know what you'd call it, post-apocalyptic madness. I don't like anything generic. I never liked what was in trend or what was in. I always just felt more comfortable not being normal, if that makes sense. And whether or not that's a good thing or not, but I feel like an individuality, if it makes you comfortable, and that's not to say there's nothing wrong with like, I don't want to say conforming to a look or whatever, because you do have to do that sometimes on a gig. But yeah, it's just like I've always liked being individual, and my hair I dreaded just because I was hitting the road and traveling. I was like, that'll be easy to manage, and then soon realized that I wanted perfect dreads all the time. So now I like maintain them. But yeah, it was honestly, it was a natural development. It wasn't something I thought about, wow, I need an image and I need this. I just found myself, it sounds so hippie, but I just through doing all the gigs, and I was very shy at the beginning. I would try and hide because you're getting used to stage, but then the more and more you gig, the more and more you become comfortable. And now I'm more comfortable on stage than I am like in the audience. So yeah, I think it's just doing it. And then, especially it's lovely. And the more established you become, people are obviously hiring you for your skills and they know you can play, but often they want like a cool looking band or something interesting or like a very diverse looking band. And it's nice when they're like, you just do you. Like, okay, that's easy because that's what I do. But you know
Cool.
yourself, stage is a bizarre place.
Oh yeah, it's a great place. Also at times a damaging place. How are your ears these days? You playing in so
Oh my
many
God.
hard rocking bands.
I mean, I've been pretty diligent with wearing earplugs all the time, just the normal little soft spongy guys I do. At the beginning, I was very bad at that. And I was getting like a little bit of ringing in that, but I also make a lot of time for quiet and silence as often as I can. Like I love nature, and I talked to an audiologist about this years ago when she did my ears, and she was actually really surprised that my ears were still very good after so many years touring in heavy rock bands. And she said actually going out hiking, being near the water, whatever, and not having artificial sounds. If you do that even a couple of times a month, it actually start heals the little hairs in your ears. Yeah, and it's very
Wow.
good for them. So I have a theory, and I could be wrong. It is just a theory. But I think because I've always done that, maybe I've balanced it. Like I spend as much time as possible in nature. That's why I moved to Joshua Tree. When I go to the national park, you don't hear anything. It's like the most beautiful silence. There's no cars. I'll just sit in that, even if it's for 20 minutes. That and just always wearing earplugs and regularly checking your ears every year or two, like check them. And sound checks, I'm like, give me a quick, okay, yeah, I'm good. It's going to change anyway when the room fills up. So whatever,
Mm.
I'm done. In and out. But yeah, I think it's definitely important. Obviously, I every now and then I get like a concerning ring that every musician gets. You're like, oh, there goes the frequency.
Oh God. Oh God. I'm so envious right now because I always hated earplugs, and I always preferred monitors and all that, and I sing as well, so I liked all that, and yeah, I've got
Yeah.
consistent tinnitus like in all the
Oh,
ears, and I've got the whooshes and the constant. So I'm
yeah.
like, I'm
It's tough for a singer. It's tough for you doing that as well because some singers, if they do it all along, they tell me that like they prefer having earplugs because they can kind of hear their head voice. But if you haven't done it all along, it's hard to change.
yeah. There's also that, but there's also like, where's the bass gone then? Then like all I can hear is my voice
True.
and not the bass, and it's like, it's
Well,
trying to
yeah,
get
what
that
you're
right.
working with too. I use those earplugs that cut I don't know what they're called. I can't remember the brand, but they're not just the sponge ones. They're like semi-pro ones that cut out mids and highs. So they cut the guitar players out, and I hear bass and just a little bit of guitar. So they're perfect because you don't lose your bass, and you can hear enough guitar that and the singer. And I've always, pretty much always toured with singers that have just bellowing voices. So it's like even if you have earplugs in, you can hear them.
Yeah. Yeah, give us advice about like, how to stay healthy on the road.
Be vegan, of course.
Yeah.
No, I'm only joking. I'm not joking, but that's just very vague. For me, I've been plant-based, whatever you want to call it, my whole life. So I find it very easy because I've never ate things like fast food or never eaten convenient food just for the sake of it. So I always travel and tour with healthy snacks. So if I know I have 2 or 3 back-to-back flights or a long drive, I always have like a piece of fruit. No, I'll have a good breakfast, and then I'll bring like nuts, fruit, all that good stuff, and maybe even make food. So it to some people that sounds like work, but to me it's just like, I mean, I want to eat good food, so I don't want to feel like crap because if I eat on the rare occasions that I'm kind of forced to eat whatever the option is, and I feel awful or I don't feel my body right because I've always, been into health, it's not worth the convenience of like, getting the fries and the veggie burger for how I'm going to feel on stage that evening or in studio or whatever. So I think it's a mindset. It really is like if you care and you want to feel good, then you'll put the little bit of effort in and switch out. It's kind of habit changes. And I think people overthink these things. It's like, don't go to like over here is so bad because everywhere is fast food, strips of like fast food joints, and the tour bus pulls up and it's like Wendy's, McDonald's, Burger King, da da da. There's always a gas station, so or petrol station, but I had to start saying gas over here.
Yeah.
And you can go in there and get, whatever it is, cashews and pistachios and an apple and popcorn and a bottle of water. But that's a decision that you have to make. I can't make it for you, no one else. Or you go and get the fast food just because that's the kind of instant dopamine hit. But I think it's like little habitual changes. And I've never found it hard to be a vegan on the road, because even in the worst places you think for, veggie or vegan, like a steakhouse, they always have sides. So I order all the sides. I'm like, oh, you have all this medley of vegetables and a baked potato or whatever it is. I'm like, just give me that as a meal. So again, it's just like training your mind to make little better decisions. And then staying hydrated is something that, like, it sounds so simple, but people just don't do. I drink so much water. Like, you need to keep yourself fueled. Yeah, and just I really think it's your own little self habits and just making yourself make better decisions. It's not that hard, because the one thing we do have control over, which it seems very little these days, is our own bodies. So
Exactly.
we can make those little, and it's, and cooking. I love to cook and I love food, so it's not a chore to me to make a healthy meal. And I also get hangry really fast, so I'm not into complicated meals. So I make like 15-minute Whopper meal. It's not like I'm doing Michelin star like veggie souffles. I'm just roasting a bunch of veggies and making, healthy choices, I guess. But I think that stands to you on the road, because I've also toured with a lot of people who, have been on the road for, especially crew, like being out with crew, have been on the road for 20, 30 years, and they're just, I'm like, how are you even alive? They have diabetes, heart disease, they're miserable, and it breaks my heart, because they're the nicest people ever. Crew are my favorite people, because they're like the ones that keep the shit together for the artists, right? But because they've just got into this pattern of fast food and energy drinks and whatnot. So, it's like, guys, if you just change that, everything will be easier. Because if you're trying to carry a body around that's having a hard time in a hard job, it's like a double whammy for, a tough life.
Exactly. But the other impact of all that, staying hydrated and eating well, is your mental health as well. I mean, keeping your mental health
Oh
right
my
on the
God.
road.
That's tough. That's tough. And it's like that takes practice. Even just in this industry, the nature of the beast that is being a hire gun. Sometimes tours get cancelled. Sometimes the artist just decides not to tour anymore, and you're like all pumped up to do this tour. Or sometimes the label or the artist has decided they actually want a completely different band. And that stuff takes its toll on you when you're cutting your teeth originally. But then there are also the things you learn, that you have to understand the nature of the game you're in. It is what it is. You can't take offense in it, and you cannot put your happiness in a gig or an artist or a band, or even your ability. It's like, until you really start to learn where happiness comes from. And this is a journey that I'm still on, like most people, like really figuring out how to be content and happy without all the things, without the gigs, without the stuff. And then everything else is like an added bonus, right? So that's only, again, something that you learn from just being out in the world, whatever your career is. It doesn't just apply to music, because life on the road is tough, and it's very tough on your mental health. And if you're kind of relying on your career to make you happy, it's never gonna help out, having that mindset. So like doing things outside of it as well is so important, and keeping, I'm always talking about like the people you surround yourself by, having a tight, reliable, grounded group of friends, as opposed to just hanging out with a bunch of, especially in these cities. Like when I first came out here, I was like, oh my God, there's like all these names and people, just fucking licking each other's asses all day long, promising this, that, and the other. There's also lovely people who I, navigate towards, but you have to start really sieving that out, because the people you surround yourself with are really going to influence, obviously, your mental health. So it's tough, though. It's no easy feat. Like, I mean, I've up and down on the roller coaster, as you know well, over the years. And, just when you think a band or a gig or something's going to happen, and then it gets pulled away, or just when you think this, and you're like left with this feeling of like, oh, what was that? But now everything is just like a separate entity. It's like, you know, these are bonus points if all these things happen. But until I figure out how to be completely happy, just sitting in the middle of Joshua Tree on my own, everything else is a bonus.
But I just want to go back to a point you made there about how it was good to have other things. Because as we said before, you have, as well as being a session player, you've got activism, a TV show, all this other stuff. I totally agree with you that doing stand-up comedy is my other outlet. I couldn't just do the one thing, I'd go mad. So I think you're right there to open your mind, because as soon as music becomes your job, full time, you kind of need to have something else, don't you?
Yeah, and I think it's really important as well, because as musicians and artists in general, we have this kind of societal pressure to, especially if you've like made it, as in it's your career in whatever shape or form that is, locally gigging or touring the world, there's this pressure to just be a musician. And that is wonderful for some people. And some people become also educators and whatnot. And that is amazing. But I'm also an advocate for, don't feel any shame in having like other interests, other jobs, other gigs. If it makes you happy, do it. Like, there's not like, oh, I'm going to look like a failure because I decide to go and, you know, do this other gig that's not music. I think that's ridiculous. I think that you should be doing as many things in life that make you happy. Obviously, if it's making you miserable, don't do it. But there is a lot of pressure on artists to like kind of keep up with this facade of, it's a hard industry. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm busy in music. It has been my full-time job since I was 25. Like, I've literally, but I choose to do other things because they also make me happy. And it also then makes me want to go back and play music. Where it's like, ooh, now I want to go back and pick my bass up. Whereas, you know, and your passions, I mean, they'll guide you anyway. If you love doing stand-up comedy, I think it's wonderful that you went there. Most people are like, oh, I can't do that because I'm doing this. Well, you can do 10 things. Why not?
Exactly.
And that, you know, it applies to within music. I think that you have to, especially in the current state of the music industry, you have to think of other outlets, like be it music placement, you know, writing and composing, teaching, whatever it is, gear reviews. You have to put your thinking cap on, because unfortunately live music has been taken from us for hopefully not too much longer, but it was already long enough. So there's no shame in expanding yourself and your brand if it makes you happy.
Absolutely.
No one's going to judge you if you do say like, oh my God, I can't believe you're not only playing bass, Ellen. That's shocking.
Yeah. I know, but sure. I mean, the way I look at it is like, you know, we only get one life. You might as well enjoy it. Unless you're Hindu, then you get a few goes.
You do. So can we switch to Hindu and get a couple of goes? And then I might try drums out in the next life.
That's it. Tanya, it's been absolutely lovely catching up with you. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Lovely to chat to you and get the banter in. I do miss that.
Guramahagat.
Guramahagat.